Hello everyone, welcome back to Azure DevOps Learning Hub. And if we are learning Kubernetes from scratch, we are at the right place. In today's episode, we will understand deeply the most important Kubernetes security concept, which is RBAC. And this is most frequently asked topics. So by end of this video, we'll understand RBAC, its importance, difference between authentication and authorization, what is cluster role binding, cluster role binding, roles, complete hands-on demo, and few of the interview questions. So without wasting any time, let's get started. What is RBAC? Imagine we have an office wherein different employees are working and everyone has access to everyone's room. Will that have a good security? Of course, no, because anyone can enter HR, finance, CEO's office as well, which is not right. Similarly, in Kubernetes, when we have different roles, like people have developers, QA engineers, DevOps engineers, security, and if they are all having the same roles, then giving everyone full access will not work. So that's why we have RBAC in place. And RBAC simply means like give users only permissions they need, role-based access control. We'll understand why RBAC. Someone might delete production nodes, remove deployments, expose sensitive secrets, could delete an entire namespace, and even a small mistake can bring down the entire application. Hence, we follow a principle of least privilege. We'll understand the difference between authentication and authorization. Yes, it's confusing because both the terms seem to be quite similar, but there is a difference. Authentication is who you are, and authorization is what you can do. And RBAC majorly handles authorization. So, RBAC has permissions like can you delete pods, delete deployments, can you view secrets, can you create namespaces? And RBAC is one of the most common authorization mechanisms which is used in Kubernetes. And a simple trick to remember is authentication is identity and authorization is permission. If you want to understand how authorization and authentication works, then simply you can say that when you log into Kubernetes using a certificate, Azure Active Directory in Azure, for example, or a Google login or a service account, Kubernetes first verifies your identity, and that process is called as authentication. However, when Kubernetes knows who you are, the next question becomes what are you allowed to do? And that's where RBAC comes into picture. Now we'll understand RBAC components. So there are four major components: the role, cluster role, and the role binding and cluster role binding. Let's understand them deeply. A role defines permissions inside a single namespace, like a permission document, you can say. So inside the development namespace, a developer is allowed to read pods, list the pods, create the deployments, or update the config maps. But these permissions apply only within the namespace, not in the cluster. So role is the namespace level permissions. And what happens in cluster role? You can view all the nodes, manage the PVs like the persistent volumes, read all the namespaces, monitor cluster wide resources. So there is where the cluster role comes in. And easy trick is role is namespace level and cluster role is entire cluster. Role binding is who will use it. So role binding connects a role to user group or a service account. And cluster role binding works exactly the same way. The only difference is instead of assigning a namespace role, it will assign a cluster role. And those permissions apply across the entire Kubernetes cluster. Let's understand the difference. So role is namespace scope and cluster role is cluster scope. Now we'll understand role binding versus cluster binding. Role binding assign role in one namespace, cluster binding assign cluster role cluster wide. We'll understand the architecture. So we have a user, then it will go to role binding, then role, then the pods and deployment. So we'll understand it like if a user requests access, the request will reach the Kubernetes. Kubernetes will check if there is role binding. If yes, then it will check which role is assigned, what permission is given. If permission exists, then access is granted, otherwise access is denied. And then it will reach the pods deployment, etc. Similarly is the role binding for the cluster role binding. So the architecture keeps this entire architecture is keeping the Kubernetes secure. So we'll quickly see a few of the commands to do the demo. So you can practice that. So if you want to create a namespace, you can have a command kubectl create namespace in development. Next, it will create a role. This role gives users to get pods, list pods, watch pods, or apply the role. So we'll have kubectl apply role for the same. Now we'll create a role binding. So the role binding assigns this role to the user called as John. You'll see this. Okay, so after that we will have kubectl apply role binding. Then we will run the command and check if the output is yes, then John can delete the pods. We'll go quickly few of the interview questions around it. So what is RBAC? RBAC is Kubernetes authorization mechanism that controls who can perform which actions on Kubernetes resources. Difference between role and cluster role. Role works inside namespace, cluster role works across the cluster. Difference between role binding and cluster role binding. Role binding assigns role within a namespace. Cluster role binding assigns a cluster role across the cluster. How do you verify permissions? We have a command kubectl auth can I to verify permissions. Can a role access multiple namespaces? For multiple namespaces or cluster-wide permissions, we use a cluster role. We'll see what are the best practices to use this. Always follow least principle, least privilege principle. Never give any cluster admin access unless it's absolutely necessary. Use groups instead of assigning permissions individually. Environments should be separate, development, QA, and production. Permissions has to be reviewed regularly, and if there are any unused role bindings, then needs to be removed and not exposing any secrets. So we'll have a quick summary. We have seen rollback, RBAC, the roles, the bindings, hands-on and interview questions. I hope this has been helpful, and in our next video we'll learn about service accounts in Kubernetes, how applications authenticate with Kubernetes API, and why service accounts are essential when we are in production environment. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video, and happy learning to all.